Hispanic voters now key in swing counties across the United States. For decades, Hispanic voters have been seen as the key voting bloc of the future, and the latest census shows how quickly the future has arrived. Hispanic people have accounted for more than half of all U.S. population gain since 2010. Welcome to Radio Labio's English program, where I share the most interesting notes of the day from social media, radio, newspapers, and other publications that you may not have had time to follow. I'm Juan Andres. The Hispanic vote is a hard thing to nail down. When you look closely, it looks less like a consistent bloc and more like other groups of voters. That is, increasingly, it looks as though different outside factors can have big influences on how Hispanics act in the voting bloc. Start with the exit poll results from the 2020 election. At a national level, the story seems pretty clear. Hispanics are a big and important Democratic constituency. The exit polls and the Census Bureau organize their demographic groups differently. The exit polls ask people whether they are Latino. The census relies on the category Hispanic or Latino, which splits them up. Nationally, the Latino vote made up about 13% of the total ballots cast last year, and Democrat Joe Biden won Latinos by 33 points. But the numbers start to look a little different when you break them down at the state level. In California, the Latino vote, primarily Mexican, is massive. It represented almost a third of all the votes cast in 2020, and it gave Biden a huge 52-point advantage. In New York, the Latino vote, primarily Puerto Rican, was even more solidly Democratic, giving Biden a 54-point edge. But the numbers look different in Texas, again primarily Mexican, where Biden had a smaller 17-point lead. Why the difference between California and Texas Latinos? Well, what's coming should worry Republicans. 73% of students in Texas are minorities who some will start voting in less than 4 years. In my opinion, Republican days in Texas are counted. And that's the difference between California and Texas Latinos, where it's a younger demographic. And in the schools, I will repeat again, 73% of the students in the entire state of Texas are minorities. This is historic, and changes are coming to Texas which will change that demographic forever. And in Florida, a heavily Cuban state where the Hispanic vote swings more widely, Biden won by only 7 points, but that's understandable. The Latino vote in Florida is markedly different because of the nature of the population. Cuban are the largest Latino group in the state, and there are also numbers of Venezuelans and Colombians. All those countries have suffered a very, very hard under communist regimes. Not so much Colombia, but definitely Venezuela and Cuba. And many immigrants from those places are leery of socialism, and that's why you hear Republicans constantly painting Democrats as socialists to try to capture the Cuban vote in Florida, which is significant in the state. But that tactic serves no purpose in California, and very soon it will be ineffective in Texas because they're Mexican. And Mexicans are not lured by that socialism tag that Republicans are trying to identify Democrats as. In a broader sense, some of the more basic rules of U.S. voters also seem to apply to Hispanics. Urban and suburban Latino voters are solidly Democratic in the exit polls, but the numbers shift in rural communities. In urban and suburban areas nationally, Biden held a big advantage with Latino voters, winning them by more than 30 points. The numbers look very different in rural areas. Biden still held an advantage, but it shrank to 15 points, less than half what it was in urban and suburban communities. Why? Many don't vote. You have to understand that many don't believe. They have come over recently, and their vote really doesn't count in the countries that they've come from, and they still feel that way when they get here. It takes a while to acculturate and understand that the vote really does count in the United States. It doesn't happen in a year or two. For people familiar with politics, the urban-rural split is familiar. It's also apparent among white voters, although with a greater divide. Last year, Democrats won among urban whites narrowly and lost among rural whites by a large margin. This will help you understand why Republicans feel the urgent need to change our system of government from democratic to autocratic. But it will definitely backfire in Florida, where the Cubans and Venezuelans are uncomfortable with socialism. But what Republicans don't realize is that they're also terrified of authoritarian governments. And the choices that they're making will finally unite Latinos, like never before seen across the United States. And we're the second biggest voting bloc in the country, affecting elections from here on in. It's extremely important to understand that. So, identifying Democrats as socialist works right now. When the Cuban Latinos in Florida realize that what they're really being sold is an autocracy, which is a very, very politically correct term for dictatorship, whether it's a party dictatorship or whether it's an individual, it doesn't make any difference. It's ruling from the top down. And a democracy is ruling from the bottom up. In other words, the people speak through their representatives and make changes at the top. And an autocratic system, the top makes the decisions, like in China and Russia, and they tell the people what's going to happen. Americans are not used to that. And whether they like it or not, they will not be comfortable with that over time. Right now they're concerned because of this fear that the minorities are becoming a bigger sector, a bigger voting bloc in the future, and they're afraid that they're going to lose the economic power and political power in the country, which I don't see. I think that all that's going to happen is that minorities are going to have a bigger voice, and they're going to have to be taken into consideration. But I don't see them as taking over the country, which is what is the biggest fear. Why? Because white Americans still hold the corporations, and we're, at this point anyway, we're driven by economics, our businesses, our economy. If we don't trade, buy, sell, our country doesn't have the income to support the military and all the other things that it does, and it loses the power of being the most powerful economic entity in the world. So it's extremely important to protect that. You can protect it in an autocratic system, but Americans are not used to an autocracy when they understand what it is. If you think that right now, for example, take the vaccination, the COVID vaccine, where Americans are frustrated because they think that they're being dictated that they have to take the vaccine, and they're not accepting that, even though their life could be in danger. Imagine when we change our system to an autocratic system and the government starts telling these people who right now believe that the Republican changes that are being suggested are in their best interest so they can keep the economic power in the country and have whites rule for generations to come, realize that what they're being sold is what they fear the most. Because if they're complaining about a democratic system with a democratic government asking them to take a vaccine and they don't want to cooperate even though their lives could be in danger, what makes you think that when there's a Republican president in the White House and there is a Republican-controlled Senate as well as a Republican House of Representatives telling them what to do, do you think for 1 minute that they're going to accept that? It's going to cause one of the biggest backlashes this country has ever faced. And you will see at that point the country unite, in my opinion. Because if there's one thing that irks Americans, it's being controlled. They want their guns, they want their liberty to carry their guns, they want their liberty to make choices with their bodies. They don't like being told what to do when it comes to their personal choices. One of the biggest ones is abortion, even though that's a religious thing. They don't like it. That's the beginning of what will happen in the future. You saw it happen in Texas. It's going to happen nationally. And eventually it'll happen with everything that big government, because that's what happens in an autocratic system. Big government starts telling them how to live their lives. You will see the right and the left meet in the middle and reject this type of government in the future. Of course, time will tell, and we have to be patient, and hopefully we will never have to face that situation because we can avoid it by keeping elections open and keeping our democratic system in place, which has served us so well. It has made us the largest economy with the biggest military on the planet. I'm Juan Andres. You can always find us on the now over 60 sites where you can hear our programs. Just Google Radio Labio, Labio, and you'll find us. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.